The station floated in the darkness of space like a jewel made of metal and glass. The celestial apex was the largest orbital platform in the known galaxy, home to 50,000 beings from hundreds of different worlds. Today, it would host the most important wedding ceremony in 1,000 years. Wiped the grease from his hands and looked at the reactor core display. The numbers were good. The fusion reactors hummed with steady power, feeding energy to every system on the massive station. He had been working on the celestial apex for 3 years now, ever since he finished his engineering training back on Earth. The pay was decent, and he got to see parts of the galaxy that most humans only dreamed about. Core 7 is running hot again, said from across the engineering bay. She was hunched over a computer terminal, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun. Not dangerous yet, but it's climbing. Walked over to check her screen. Was right. The temperature in reactor core 7 had risen by 3 degrees in the last hour. Not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. And always paid attention. Could be a coolant flow issue, said. I'll check the pumps after the ceremony starts. Everyone will be watching the wedding anyway. Frowned at her screen. There's something else. The defensive grid has been showing weird power fluctuations all morning. Small ones, but they're there, like someone is testing the system. Did you report it? 3 times. Security says everything is fine. They think I'm being paranoid because I'm human. His voice was bitter. They said humans always worry too much about things that don't matter. Understood her frustration. Humans had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago, when the first alien ships appeared in Earth's orbit. At first, everyone on Earth thought humanity would finally take its place among the stars as equals. But reality was different. Aliens saw humans as weak and unremarkable. Average height, average strength, no special abilities. Good enough for fixing machines and cleaning corridors, but not much else. Keep monitoring it, said. If anything gets worse, we'll shut down the affected systems ourselves. Protocol can wait if there's real danger. Nodded and returned to her screens. Checked his watch. The wedding would start in 2 hours. Already, he could hear the sounds of celebration echoing through the station's metal corridors. Musicians from a dozen worlds played strange instruments. Chefs prepared foods that humans couldn't even digest. And everywhere, beings in elaborate clothing hurried toward the grand hall where Princess Vara would marry Commander. The marriage would unite the Empire and the Coalition, 2 of the 3 great powers in the galaxy. Politicians called it a historic alliance. Traders saw it as an opportunity for new markets. Soldiers hoped it meant peace. And for people who just wanted to do their jobs and go home at the end of the day, it meant extra security checks and longer shifts. Far above the engineering decks, in the royal chambers near the Grand Hall, Princess Vara stood before a mirror while her attendants prepared her for the ceremony. She was tall, even by standards, with skin that glowed with soft blue light. Her people had evolved on a world with 3 moons, and their bodies still carried that ancient luminescence. In the right light, looked like a living constellation. Your Highness, please hold still, said one of the attendants, adjusting the ceremonial robes that flowed around Vara's shoulders like liquid silver. Vara barely heard her. Her mind was elsewhere, thinking about what this marriage meant. She had met Commander only 5 times before today. He was ambitious, cunning, and respected among the military. Her father, the Emperor, believed this alliance would prevent a war with the Coalition. Vara wanted to believe it too, but something about made her uncomfortable. The way he looked at her was not the way someone looked at a future wife. It was the way someone looked at an obstacle that needed to be removed. Where is Wu? Vara asked suddenly. She should be here. The attendants exchanged glances. The handmaiden Wu requested permission to check the ceremony arrangements in the Grand Hall. Your Highness. She will return shortly. Vara felt a small knot of worry in her chest. Wu had been her handmaiden and friend for 5 years. Recently, Wu had been acting strange, nervous, always looking over her shoulder. Vara had asked her what was wrong, but Wu insisted everything was fine. In truth, everything was not fine. At that very moment, Wu was in a maintenance corridor 2 levels below the Grand Hall, copying encrypted files onto a small data crystal. Her hands shook as she worked. She had been investigating Commander for 3 months, ever since she overheard 2 of his officers talking about the plan, and after the princess is eliminated. It took weeks to find proof, had been careful but not careful enough. Wu found communications between and members of the collective, the third great power in the galaxy. The messages revealed a horrifying plot, planned to assassinate Princess Vara immediately after the wedding ceremony. He would make it look like an attack by agents. The Empire would demand revenge. The coalition, led by, would promise to deliver it. Together, they would wage a war that would kill billions of citizens and leave as the ruler of 2 empires instead of 1. The final file finished copying. Wu pulled the crystal from the computer port and hid it in a pocket of her dress. She had to get this information to someone who could stop the wedding. But who would believe a handmaiden making accusations against a coalition commander? She needed to reach someone in authority, someone who would listen. The station's speakers crackled to life. Attention, all personnel. The royal wedding ceremony will begin in 1 hour. All guests should proceed to the Grand Hall. All non-essential personnel should remain at their posts. Wu's time was running out. She had 1 hour to stop a wedding and save a princess. 1 hour to prevent a war. She took a deep breath, touched the data crystal in her pocket to make sure it was still there, and started running toward the Grand Hall. In the engineering bay's computer suddenly began beeping. She leaned forward, studying the display with growing alarm. The power fluctuations in the defensive grid were getting worse, much worse, and now she could see a pattern in the data. This wasn't a malfunction. This was sabotage. She called out, "We have a serious problem," but was already moving toward her station. He had heard the alarm in her voice. Together, they stared at the screen, watching as the station's defensive systems slowly began to fail. Neither of them knew about the wedding conspiracy or the assassination plot. They only knew that something was very wrong with the celestial apex, and they were running out of time to fix it. The Grand Hall was the most beautiful room on the celestial apex. Its walls were made of transparent crystal that looked out into space, held in place by force fields that kept the air inside while letting everyone see the stars. Thousands of seats filled the enormous chamber, each one occupied by someone important. Ambassadors wore their finest clothes. Military officers displayed their medals. And everyone whispered about how this marriage would change the galaxy forever. Princess Vara walked slowly down the long aisle toward the ceremonial platform. Her robes caught the light from distant stars and seemed to glow even brighter than her skin. She kept her face calm and peaceful, the way she had been taught since childhood. A princess never showed fear or doubt in public. But inside, Vara felt both. Commander waited for her at the end of the aisle, wearing his full military armor polished to a mirror shine. His face was hidden behind a ceremonial helmet, which was traditional for warriors during important ceremonies. Vara wished she could see his eyes. She wanted to know what he was really thinking. Around the edges of the Grand Hall, guards stood at attention. Most wore the blue and silver uniforms of royal security. But Vara noticed there were also many soldiers present, all wearing the red and black armor of his personal unit. Her father had allowed it as a gesture of goodwill. Now Vara wondered if that had been a mistake. The ceremony master, an elderly being from a species that lived for 300 years, began to recite the traditional words. His voice echoed through the hall in a language so old that only scholars still understood it. Vara tried to focus on the words, tried to feel something about this moment that would define the rest of her life. But all she could think about was Wu. Where was her handmaiden? Why hadn't she returned? The answer came seconds later in the worst possible way. The doors at the back of the Grand Hall suddenly burst open. Wu ran into the room, her dress torn and her face desperate. She was breathing hard, like she had been running for a long time. "Stop," Wu shouted. Her voice cut through the ceremonial chanting like a knife. "Stop the ceremony. This wedding cannot happen." The entire hall fell silent. Thousands of eyes turned to stare at the handmaiden. On the ceremonial platform, Commander turned his helmeted head toward the interruption. Vara felt her heart begin to race. Something terrible was about to happen. She could feel it. "Guards," called the ceremony master, his voice shaking with anger. "Remove this person immediately." 4 royal guards moved toward Wu. She held up the data crystal in her hand, her voice desperate. "I have proof. Commander is planning to murder Princess Vara. He has been working with the collective to start a war. Please, you must listen to me." Before the guards could reach her, several soldiers moved to block their path. Their weapons were not drawn, but the threat was clear. The royal guards stopped, confused. They looked to their captain for orders, but the captain was staring at Commander with an expression that could only mean one thing. The captain was part of the conspiracy. Vara took a step backward, away from. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Have you been planning to kill me?" Reached up and removed his ceremonial helmet. His face was calm, almost amused. "Your handmaiden has an active imagination, Your Highness. Perhaps the stress of the ceremony has affected her mind. Guards, arrest her for treason." But as he spoke, more soldiers moved into position around the hall. They stood near the exits, near the communication stations, near the environmental controls. Vara realized with growing horror that this was not a simple assassination. This was a military takeover of the entire station. In the engineering bay, alarms began to scream. Jumped up from her station, her face pale. The defensive grid just went completely offline. All of it, everywhere on the station. Was already running toward the main control panel. His fingers flew across trying to activate backup systems. Nothing responded. "It's been locked out. Someone with high-level access codes shut it down deliberately." "Why would anyone do that?" asked, but even as she said it, she knew the answer. She pulled up the long-range sensors on her screen and felt her blood go cold. "Look at this." He looked. Outside the station, space itself seemed to shimmer and bend. Ships were appearing out of nowhere, dozens of them, all bearing coalition markings. They had been hiding using advanced stealth technology, waiting for the defensive grid to fail. Now they surrounded the celestial apex like predators circling wounded prey. "We need to evacuate," someone shouted from across the engineering bay. Other human workers were already moving toward the exits, heading for the escape pods. "If those ships open fire, the escape pods won't matter," said. He pulled up a schematic of the station's reactor system on his screen. "The reactors have been sabotaged too. If I'm reading this right, Core 7 is going to overload in less than 10 minutes. When it goes, it will trigger a chain reaction. The entire station will explode." Stared at him. "Can we stop it?" "Maybe, if someone can get to the reactor core and manually override the safety systems. But the radiation levels are already climbing. It would kill most species in seconds." "Most species," repeated slowly, "but not humans." They looked at each other. It was true. Earth had much higher radiation levels than most inhabited worlds, something about the planet's magnetic field and sun. Humans had evolved to survive conditions that would be lethal to or most other species. It was one of the few advantages humanity had, though nobody considered it important. Until now. "I'll go," said. "Keep trying to get the defensive grid back online. And if I don't make it, get to an escape pod." "If you don't make it, the escape pods won't matter," reminded him. But she squeezed his shoulder once quickly and then turned back to her screens. Ran. The corridors were filled with panicking beings rushing in every direction. Some were heading for escape pods. Others were trying to reach the grand hall to see what was happening. Nobody tried to stop the human engineer as he sprinted toward the lower levels where the reactors lived. In the grand hall, the situation was falling apart. Wu fought against the guards trying to restrain her, still shouting about the conspiracy. Princess Vara stood frozen on the ceremonial platform, watching as soldiers moved into formation around her. She was trapped. Her own guards were either working for or too confused to act. Then spoke, and his voice carried throughout the hall through the audio system. "I must confess, Princess, your handmaiden is not entirely wrong. I did plan to kill you, but not quite like this." He gestured to one of his soldiers, who pressed a button on a control device. Every screen in the Grand Hall suddenly displayed the same image: the warships surrounding the station, their weapons charging, ready to fire. "You see," continued, "I am going to destroy this station with everyone on it. The evidence will show that agents infiltrated the security systems. Your father will declare war. The coalition will support him. And when the war is over, I will rule both empires. A simple plan, really." Vara felt anger replace her fear. "You will never get away with this." "I already have," turned to his soldiers. "Kill her, kill everyone." The soldiers raised their weapons. Vara prepared to fight, even though she knew it was hopeless. Wu screamed in rage and despair. And then something impossible happened. A maintenance panel in the ceiling suddenly exploded inward, and a human came crashing through it into the Grand Hall. The human who crashed through the ceiling panel was not a soldier. His name was Jin, and until 30 minutes ago, he had been a maintenance technician working on the station's communication systems. He landed hard on the crystal floor of the Grand Hall, rolled, and came up holding a plasma cutter that was meant for welding metal, not fighting battles. For a moment, everyone simply stared at him. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. His work uniform was torn and dirty. He looked like he had climbed through every service tunnel in the station, which in fact he had. Jin had been helping Wu investigate the sabotage for the past 2 days. She had come to him because he had access to the station's technical systems. Together, they had discovered the plot, but Wu insisted on confronting it alone. She didn't want to put him in danger. When he heard her shouting in the Grand Hall through the communication system, he knew she was in trouble. So he did the only thing he could think of. He ran to help her. Now he stood in the middle of the galaxy's most important wedding ceremony, facing down 30 armed soldiers with a tool meant for cutting pipes. It was possibly the thing he had ever done. But when he saw Princess Vara surrounded by soldiers with their weapons pointed at her, something in his brain simply refused to accept it. This was wrong. Someone had to do something. So he did something. Jin charged at the nearest soldier with a scream that was more fear than courage. The soldier turned, surprised. Aliens were not used to humans attacking them. Humans were weak. Everyone knew that. The soldier raised his weapon, confident that one shot would end this foolish interruption. But Jin was already moving. The celestial apex had lower gravity than Earth. Most species preferred it that way because it made everything easier. But humans had evolved on a world with heavy gravity. In the light gravity of the station, Jin moved faster than the soldier expected. He swung the plasma cutter in a wild arc, and the superheated blade cut through the soldier's weapon, then through his armor, then through his arm. The soldier fell, screaming. The other soldiers turned toward this new threat. Jin kept moving, driven by pure adrenaline and terror. He knew he was going to die. But maybe, if he was lucky, he could distract the soldiers long enough for Princess Vara to escape. Commander watched this scene with disbelief. A human, a single, unarmed human was attacking his elite soldiers. It was absurd. It should have been impossible. And yet the human kept moving, kept fighting, even as energy bolts burned his skin and shrapnel cut his legs. Princess Vara stood frozen, watching Jin fight. She had seen humans before, of course. They worked all over the station, but she had never really looked at them. They were just background noise, unremarkable beings who fixed things and cleaned things and did the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. Now she looked, really looked, and what she saw was not weakness. What she saw was a being who should have been dead 3 times over, still fighting. A being who had no reason to help her, risking his life anyway. A being who absorbed pain that would have dropped a warrior and kept going like the pain didn't matter. In that moment, Vara understood something that the rest of the galaxy had missed. Humans were not weak. They were survivors. Their ancestors had crawled out of caves on a death world and built cities that touched the sky. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters that would have ended any other species. That survival instinct was written into every cell of their bodies. And right now, that instinct was telling Jin to protect someone who needed help, no matter the cost. Vara stopped being frozen. She grabbed one of the ceremonial weapons displayed on the wall behind the platform. It was an ancient blade, used in coronation ceremonies for thousands of years. She had trained with weapons since childhood. All royalty did. It was time to remember that training. She jumped from the platform and landed next to Jin. He was breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but still standing. "Behind you!" Vara shouted, and her blade caught a soldier who was trying to shoot Jin in the back. Wu saw her princess fighting and felt new strength flood through her. She had been trained in combat too. All royal handmaidens were. She grabbed a weapon from a fallen guard and joined the fight. 3 against 30. It should have been over in seconds, but something strange was happening. The humans kept adapting to the battle in ways the soldiers couldn't predict. Jin used the low gravity to jump in directions that seemed impossible. Wu rolled under attacks and came up slashing at weak points in armor. And Princess Vara fought alongside them, learning their rhythm, matching their unpredictable style. Down in the reactor core was fighting a different battle. The heat in the chamber was beyond anything most species could tolerate. The air itself seemed to shimmer and burn. Warning lights flashed red all around him. The reactor was 10 seconds away from a catastrophic meltdown. His hands were blistering. The radiation detector on his belt was screaming warnings, but ignored all of it. He reached into the reactor's manual override panel and began pulling circuit breakers, one after another, shutting down systems in the precise sequence needed to prevent the chain reaction. His vision started to blur. The heat was cooking him alive, but he kept working. 9 systems down, 10, 11, just 2 more. His fingers, now raw and bleeding, found the 12th circuit breaker and pulled, then the 13th. The reactor's warning alarms suddenly changed tone. The temperature began to drop. The chain reaction stopped, had done it. He had saved the station. Then he collapsed. But before he fell, his burned fingers found one more control panel. The station's internal weapons system. During the chaos, nobody had thought about the defensive weapons that protected the celestial apex from internal threats like fires or hull breaches. Had studied every system on this station during his 3 years here. He knew exactly how to reroute power from the now stable reactor to those weapons. In space, the warships waited for their order to fire. Inside the ships, commanders watched their targeting screens, confident that this would be easy. The station was helpless. Its defensive grid was down. In minutes, the celestial apex would be nothing but debris, and Commander would be one step closer to ruling the galaxy. Then the station's internal defense weapons came online. They were meant to shoot down small threats like asteroids or debris. They were not supposed to be turned outward at warships, but had rerouted them anyway. The weapons fired, not enough to destroy the massive warships, but enough to damage them, enough to make them hesitate, enough to give the station a chance. In the Grand Hall, Commander saw his careful plan falling apart. The station should have exploded by now. His warships should have been finishing off the survivors. Instead, his soldiers were losing a fight against 3 opponents. A princess, a handmaiden, and a human technician were beating his elite forces through sheer determination and unpredictability. "Enough!" roared. He drew his own weapon, a massive blade that could cut through starship armor. "I will kill the princess myself." He charged toward Vara. She raised her ceremonial blade to block his strike, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. was wearing powered armor. He was trained in warfare since birth. One blow from his weapon would shatter her defense and end her life. But Jin threw himself between them. His blade hit him instead of Vara. The impact should have killed the human instantly, expected to see the body fall in pieces. Instead, Jin caught the blade with his hands. His palms were already ruined from the plasma cutter. Now they were shredded by the razor edge of his weapon, but he held on. Blood ran down his arms. His face twisted in agony, but he held on. "Impossible," whispered. "No being should be able to withstand that much pain. The human should be dead or unconscious. How was he still standing? How was he still fighting?" Vara understood. Humans didn't have superior strength or speed or intelligence, but they had something that evolution had beaten into them through millions of years of surviving on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They had endurance. They had the ability to keep going when any sensible being would give up. They had the stubborn, impossible refusal to die quietly. And right now, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Jin held Commander's blade with his bleeding hands and refused to let go. Pain screamed through every nerve in his body. His vision was starting to go dark around the edges. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a simple thought kept him conscious and fighting. If he let go, Vara would die. He couldn't allow that to happen. Stared at the human in shock and growing fear. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were laborers and technicians. They were not warriors. They did not hold onto blades that were cutting their hands to pieces. They did not keep fighting when any reasonable being would have surrendered or died. Princess Vara saw her moment. While was distracted by the impossible human, she drove her ceremonial blade upward beneath his armor. The blade found the weak point at his hip joint and sank deep, roared in pain and stumbled backward, releasing his weapon. Jin fell to his knees, finally letting go, his hands now completely destroyed. Wu appeared at Vara's side, breathing hard but still ready to fight. Around them, the grand hall was in chaos. Some of soldiers were still fighting. Others had begun to retreat, seeing their commander wounded and their plan failing. The guests who had come to watch a wedding were now hiding behind seats and pillars, terrified. "Fall back," shouted to his soldiers. "To the ships, execute Plan Omega." The remaining soldiers began a fighting retreat toward the exits. Wu wanted to chase them, but Vara grabbed her arm. "Let them go. We need to help the wounded and secure the station." "But they'll escape." "They won't get far," Vara said. She had seen the station's internal weapons fire at the warships. Someone had reactivated the defenses. The station was fighting back. She looked down at Jin, who was still on his knees, barely conscious. His hands were ruined. Burns and cuts covered his body. By all logic, he should be dead. "Why?" Vara asked quietly. "Why did you do this? You don't even know me." Jin looked up at her with eyes that were glazed with shock and pain. "You needed help," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Then he collapsed. Vara caught him before he hit the floor. For the first time in her life, she held a human in her arms. He was heavier than she expected, denser. That came from evolving on a high-gravity world. She could feel his heart beating fast and strong despite his injuries, still fighting to survive, still refusing to give up. "Get medical help," Vara shouted. Several attendants rushed forward with emergency medical equipment. They looked uncertain. Medicine was advanced, but human biology was different. Would their treatments even work? "Do what you can," Vara ordered. "If he dies because we failed to help him after he saved us, I will never forgive myself." In the engineering bay, was working frantically at her computer station. She had managed to partially restore power to the defensive grid. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the warships think twice about attacking. Now she was trying to lock down the station's docking bays to prevent soldiers from escaping. Other human engineers had gathered around her. Most of the alien workers had fled to escape pods, but the humans had stayed at their posts. Not because they were braver, but because they understood something the others didn't. If the station fell, the escape pods wouldn't save anyone. The warships would hunt them down. The only chance for survival was to save the station itself. "I need access to the docking bay controls," said. "Can anyone get me past the security locks?" A young human technician named Bora raised her hand. "I worked on those systems last month during maintenance. I know. Show me." Bora leaned over the console and her fingers flew across the keyboard. Within seconds, she had bypassed 3 security protocols and given access to the docking bay systems. "There. But be careful. If you shut the bays down too quickly, you could trap our own people inside." Studied the schematic. She could see which docking bays had active ships. Most were civilian vessels that had brought guests to the wedding. But 3 bays held military transport ships with markings. Those would be escape vehicles. She locked down those 3 bays. Instantly, alarms began to sound throughout the station. Soldiers were trapped. They couldn't reach their ships. They couldn't escape. The plan that was supposed to end with them as heroes of a great war would now end with them as prisoners on a station they had tried to destroy. Deep in the station's medical bay was slowly waking up. His hands were wrapped in regeneration bandages. His skin had been treated for radiation burns. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his entire body. "Stay down," a medical officer said. But she spoke Galactic Standard with a gentle accent. "You suffered severe radiation exposure and thermal damage. Your species has remarkable resistance to both, but you still pushed yourself far beyond safe limits." The station managed to say, "The reactor is stable thanks to you. You saved 50,000 lives today." The medical officer looked at him with something like wonder. "I have been working in medicine for 30 years, and I have never seen anyone survive what you went through in that reactor core. The radiation alone should have killed you. The heat should have cooked you alive. How did you keep going?" Thought about that. How did he explain it? How did he explain that humans had survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years? That their ancestors had lived through droughts and famines and predators that hunted them in the darkness? That pain and suffering were not reasons to give up, but reasons to keep fighting, because giving up meant death. "I just did my job," he said finally. Outside the station, the warships were in disarray. Their surprise attack had failed. The station had not exploded. Their soldiers were trapped inside. And now, other ships were arriving. Military vessels appeared from faster-than-light travel, summoned by automated distress signals. They surrounded the ships and demanded surrender. Some of the commanders wanted to fight, but their weapons were damaged from the internal defense systems. Their leader was wounded and trapped on the station, and the element of surprise was gone. Slowly, one by one, the warships powered down their weapons and accepted surrender. In the Grand Hall, station security had finally regained control. The confused royal guards, once they understood what had happened, arrested the captain who had betrayed them. Remaining soldiers were disarmed and taken into custody, and Commander himself, bleeding from his wound and burning with hatred, was led away in chains. Princess Vara stood in the middle of the ruined ceremonial hall and looked around at the destruction. The crystal walls were scorched from weapons fire. The beautiful decorations were torn and burned. Blood stained the floor where so many had fought and died. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, it had become a battlefield. But she was alive. The station was alive. And 50,000 beings would go home to their families because a few humans had refused to run away when any sensible being would have fled. Wu limped over to Vara. The handmaiden had a cut on her forehead and a bruised shoulder, but she was smiling. "We won," she said simply. "You won," Vara corrected. "You discovered the plot. You tried to warn everyone. I should have listened to you sooner." "You listened when it mattered." Wu looked at the place where Jin had fallen. "Is he going to survive?" "The medical team thinks so. Humans are more resilient than anyone knew. Vara paused. Wu, tell me the truth. Are you really just a handmaiden? Wu's smile turned mysterious. I am whatever you need me to be, Your Highness. Today, you needed someone to uncover a conspiracy. Tomorrow, you might need someone to help rebuild trust between our empire and the rest of the galaxy. Vara understood. Wu was an intelligence agent, probably had been for years, and Vara had never suspected. Did my father know? Your father values your safety above all else. He made sure you had protection, even if you didn't know about it. Before Vara could respond, one of her attendants approached nervously. Your Highness, your father is on the communication channel. He wishes to speak with you immediately. Vara took a deep breath. The Emperor would have heard about the attack by now. He would want answers. He would want to know how this disaster had happened during what should have been a simple wedding ceremony. And she would have to tell him that humans, the species everyone had dismissed as weak and unremarkable, had saved his daughter and prevented a war that would have killed billions. She wondered if he would believe her. She wondered if anyone would believe what had happened here today. A few humans against impossible odds, surviving through pure determination and refusal to surrender. But she had seen it with her own eyes. She had fought alongside them, and she would never think of humans the same way again. 3 weeks after the failed wedding, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the massive chamber, all talking at once. The news of Commander's conspiracy had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The coalition was in chaos. Some wanted to apologize and make peace. Others wanted to claim that had acted alone, without approval from the coalition government. A few even suggested that the whole thing was a lie invented by the Empire to make the look bad. Princess Vara stood in the center of the chamber, waiting for permission to speak. She wore formal robes instead of ceremonial dress. No jewelry, no decorations. She wanted the council to focus on her words, not her appearance. Beside her stood Wu, who had been revealed as a member of intelligence. The handmaiden disguise was gone, replaced by the uniform of a special agent. The council recognizes Princess Vara of the Empire, announced the council speaker, an ancient being who had held the position for 50 years. Vara stepped forward. Honored representatives, I come before you today not to speak of war but of peace. Commander tried to murder me and destroy the celestial apex. He wanted to start a war that would have killed billions. His plan almost succeeded, but it failed because of actions taken by people nobody expected to be heroes. She pressed a button on her control pad. Holographic images appeared in the air above the council chamber. Security footage from the celestial apex showing the events of that day. Jinn crashing through the ceiling panel, working in the burning reactor core, restoring power to the defensive systems. Bo-Ra and other human engineers staying at their posts while everyone else fled. These are humans, Vara said. For 15 years, the galaxy has treated them as second-class citizens. We hired them for jobs we considered beneath us. We dismissed them as weak and unremarkable. We were wrong. The images continued to play. Jinn holding his blade with his bare hands, his face twisted in agony but refusing to let go, blood running down his arms, and still fighting, still protecting someone he barely knew. I have studied human history since that day, Vara continued. Do you know what I learned? Humans evolved on a death world. Their planet tried to kill them with ice ages that lasted 10,000 years, with predators that hunted them in the darkness, with diseases that wiped out entire populations. And they survived, not because they were strong or fast or smart, but because they refused to give up. Ever. She let that sink in for a moment. The council chamber was completely silent now. Everyone was watching the holographic images, watching humans do things that should have been impossible. When the radiation was lethal, a human engineer walked into it anyway and saved the station. When the pain was unbearable, a human technician held onto a blade and gave me the chance to survive. When any sensible being would have fled to escape pods, Human workers stayed at their posts and fought to save everyone on the station. These are not the actions of a weak species. These are the actions of survivors. A representative from the coalition stood up. What is your point, Princess? Are you saying we should fear humans, that we should treat them as a threat? No, Vara said firmly. I am saying we should treat them as equals. I am proposing a formal alliance between the Empire and humanity, not as masters and servants, not as employers and workers, but as partners. The council chamber erupted in noise. Some representatives shouted in agreement. Others shouted in protest. Humans were too unpredictable, too emotional, too willing to sacrifice themselves for others. These were seen as flaws, not virtues. How could such a species be trusted with real responsibility? The council speaker called for order. When the chamber finally quieted down, he looked at Vara with his ancient eyes. Princess, you are asking us to change how we view an entire species based on the actions of a few individuals. Is that wise? I am asking you to judge humans by what they do, not by what you assume they are, Vara replied. Judge them by the engineer who burned his hands saving 50,000 lives. Judge them by the technician who fought 30 soldiers to protect a stranger. Judge them by the workers who stayed at their posts when they could have run to safety. If those actions don't earn respect, then what does? Another representative stood. This one was from a species that valued logic above all else. Princess, your proposal is emotional, not practical. What do humans offer that we cannot get from other species? What makes them worth this alliance? Vara smiled. She had been expecting this question. Humans offer something the galaxy has forgotten how to do. They offer the ability to keep going when hope is lost, to fight when the battle seems impossible, to survive when any reasonable being would give up. I believe the galaxy is going to need those qualities very soon. She pressed another button on her control pad. New images appeared, star charts showing the edge of known space, strange readings from deep space sensors, and intelligence reports about something moving in the darkness beyond the frontier. The collective had been quiet since the failed assassination. Too quiet. Vara's intelligence agents believed they were planning something big. War is coming, Vara said quietly. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but it is coming. And when it does, we will need people who don't know how to quit. We will need people who have spent millions of years learning how to survive against impossible odds. We will need humans. The council chamber was silent again. Representatives looked at the star charts and the intelligence reports. They looked at the images of humans fighting and bleeding and refusing to fall. And slowly, understanding began to spread. The council speaker stood. The council will vote on Princess Vara's proposal, but first, I believe we should hear from a human. Is there anyone present who can speak for Earth? A door at the side of the chamber opened. Walked in, his hands still wrapped in healing bandages. He had not wanted to come. He was just an engineer. He fixed reactors and maintained systems. He was not a diplomat or a politician. But Princess Vara had asked him personally, and after what they had been through together, he could not refuse. He walked to the center of the chamber and looked up at the hundreds of representatives staring down at him. For a moment, he felt like a bug under a microscope. Then he remembered holding circuit breakers with burning hands. He remembered the reactor core screaming warnings at him. He remembered doing his job even when it meant dying. Suddenly, a room full of politicians didn't seem so scary anymore. My name is, he said. His voice was quiet, but the chamber's audio system carried it to every seat. I'm not important, I'm just an engineer, but Princess Vara asked me to speak, so I'll tell you what I think. Humans don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to start wars or build empires. We just want to work. We want to fix things that are broken. We want to help people who need help. If that's worth something to you, then we'd be happy to be your partners. If not, we'll go back to Earth and you can forget about us. He turned to leave. He had said what he came to say, but then another voice called out. Wait. Jin walked into the chamber. He should have been in a medical bed. His hands were still healing. His body was covered in scars from the battle, but he had insisted on coming. He limped to the center of the chamber and stood next to. "I'm Jin. I'm just a technician. I fix communication systems, but I want to say something." He looked up at the representatives. "Everyone keeps talking about how humans are survivors, how we endure pain and keep fighting. That's true, but you're missing something important. We don't survive just to survive. We survive because we care about things, about people, about doing what's right even when it's hard." He held up his hands. "I didn't fight those soldiers because I'm tough. I fought because Princess Vara needed help and nobody else was helping her. That's what humans do. We help, even when it hurts, even when it's dangerous, even when we might die, because that's what it means to be human." Jin and stood together in the center of the Galactic Council. Two ordinary humans who had done extraordinary things, not because they were special, but because they had refused to do nothing when action was needed. Princess Vara felt her eyes burn with tears she refused to let fall. These humans, these remarkable, impossible, stubborn survivors, they had saved her life. They had saved the station. And now they stood before the galaxy with dignity and humility, asking for nothing except the chance to be treated fairly. The council speaker looked at the two humans for a long moment. Then he looked at Princess Vara. Then he looked around at all the representatives in the chamber. "The council will now vote on Princess Vara's proposal for an alliance with humanity. All in favor." The vote was not unanimous. Some species still feared humans. Some still thought they were too unpredictable, but enough voted yes. Enough recognized what Vara had seen, that humanity's greatest strength was not physical power or intelligence. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to give up on people who needed help. The alliance was approved. Humanity would become a full partner in galactic society, not servants, not workers, but equals. After the vote, Vara found Jin and in a quiet corridor outside the council chamber, and Bora were with them, along with several other human engineers from the celestial apex. They were talking and laughing, celebrating the news. "Thank you," Vara said simply, "for everything." Jin shrugged, a very human gesture. "We just did what needed to be done." "That's exactly my point," Vara said. She looked at all of them, these ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. The galaxy forgot that doing what needs to be done, even when it's hard, is the most important quality any being can have. You reminded us, and I promise we won't forget again. She held out her hand, another human gesture she had learned. Jin took it carefully with his healing hands. Then and Bora and all the others. One by one, they shook hands with the princess who had learned to see them as they truly were. Not weak, not unremarkable, but survivors, helpers, heroes. The wedding had been stopped. Commander was in prison awaiting trial. The coalition was reorganizing under new leadership, and humanity had taken its first real step toward becoming part of the galactic community, not as laborers, not as servants, but as partners in building a better future. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the frontier, the collective watched and planned. War was coming just as Vara had predicted, but when it came, the galaxy would face it with new allies, allies who had spent millions of years learning one simple lesson. No matter how bad things get, no matter how impossible the odds, you never give up. You never stop fighting. You never abandon people who need help, because that's what it means to survive. And humans were very, very good at surviving.